Good to see everyone here. Welcome especially, of course, to a panel. Distinguished it is indeed. We have Shirong Chen, who's the China editor of the BBC World Service, and in this multi-platform era, that's a pretty big job, involving a lot of stuff, a lot of languages, a lot of platforms, including the BBC World Service Radio, BBC World Service Television, in Chinese and in other languages. Isabel Hilton, journalist and broadcaster, currently editor of China Dialogue, in case you're not familiar with it, which you probably are. It's an online website, China Dialogue. And Xiao Jiang, PhD student, now at Westminster, also known for being one of the organizers of the Tiananmen Square demonstrations 20 years ago. Unfortunately, had to spend 18 months reflecting on your activity in a Chinese jail for what you did, and then there were years of harassment. But now he's blogging for Amnesty International. You can read it on their website, of course, unless you live in China. The phones are off. Julie's got the microphone for when you want to ask questions. I wanted just to ask, I guess, just for 2 minutes each, sum up what Tiananmen meant, where we are now, and where we're going. Isabel.
Oh, thank you.
2 minutes.
Oh, right,
Starting
2 minutes.
now.
Right, it's a summarised Proust competition again. I sometimes like to play what if. You know, what if they decided to negotiate rather than move the tanks in? Because I think that we tend to forget, once such a cataclysmic event has happened, that there was a choice. There was a constituency that inside the party for political reform, represented by Zhao Ziyang. There was certainly a big public desire for political reform, and the demands that were being made were not that radical. Against that, it was difficult to see with whom you would negotiate, but what they were being asked to do was to respond to a demand for greater personal freedoms, a government that was more responsive to its people, an end to corruption. I mean, a whole series of things which are still on the list. There was a choice. They made a choice that sent China off in a completely different direction. And they ended up with a deal that said, we will deliver rapid economic growth, we will deliver you prosperity. You can believe all kinds of things, including crazy religions if you choose, except for one. You can have a great deal more personal liberty, but you have to stay out of politics. And that has been quite successful, I have to say. But but what it's done is postpone the problem. What is the problem? The problem is, how does what is essentially an 18th century land-based empire arrive at a modern, flexible, functioning political form? And this is a quest, this is a search that's gone on for 100 years in China. How do you reach a stable political form that satisfies a fifth of the world's population, or at least enough of them, you know, for it to be constructive? And by choosing the authoritarian route for the last 20 years, whilst they've done it intelligently, I think that they have left these questions still outstanding, and at some point these questions have to be asked. And I think the demand for them will not come up as a repetition of the democracy movement of 1989, but it will come up in different forms. It will pose different challenges. And my doubt about the stability of the present arrangements is that it doesn't seem to me that they're terribly good at withstanding shocks. And shocks are what political systems have to be able to withstand.
We'll want more on that on June the 4th. Zhao Jiang.
So, after Tiananmen massacre, the government believe in violence, and they improve the political mechanism and to control and crack down the attribute very small birds when the people practice civil rights. There's one level for government level. The other level, I think the people, especially they join this movement, the people they are now illusion on the government. They want to fight for themselves the rights. That's very important if you look about the human rights activities in China, and different civil rights content, including the freedom of religion, belief, and including freedom of organization. The people try to establish the independent society and maybe move on the civil society. That is the people, more and more people have the citizen conscious, if you can say that way. But the problem is how far the independent society can going on, and this question is lived, and also the government, the collective, the state power, and they most use two propaganda way, because after Tiananmen Massacre, if government use Communist Party use only Communist Party ideology totally crushed. The Communist Party the most time use nationalism, and also they use they justify their rule is by the economic development. But there's two problems. One, if the China's economic growth just drive down, and this is a crisis, and maybe the challenge from the collective, from the powerless. The other things, nationalism is a very complex issue. If you talk nationalism, the Communist Party now the most reference from the Confucianism, but there's only a Communist Party version. If you talk about talk about Han Chinese, they have given different version, different confused version. And if you talk other minority groups, they don't believe the Confucianism. That is the question is, what is China? What is Chinese?
Sure.
Well, I guess so many people are gathered here. That means June the 4th still matters to us, everybody. But why does it matter? Some people argue that the events that took place 20 years ago may be just a thing of the past. Why can't we just let it rest? I think for obvious reasons. For one thing, the mothers and fathers are still seeking the truth, as you said. Also, it's not just the numbers. It's a kind of what happened. Many people I've spoken to, people old and young, and they say, well, we sort of heard and read and been told by our parents about this and so on. But what happened? So many Chinese students, after they come to this country, then they suddenly realize, oh God, such an important event in Chinese history happened, and we don't know much about it. These are the young students in their, well, still some in their teens and some in their early 20s, and say, wow, we should know a bit more, and we should make sure that history wouldn't repeat itself. Would it or would it not? I'm not sure. It's not for me to say, but it's still pretty important. Certainly, the ordinary Chinese people don't want any more bloodshed on Chinese soil, not by the Chinese troops anyway. The Chinese leaders, well, interestingly, don't want any repeat, or they don't even want us to talk about it. Otherwise, there will be a real, truly free society in China. They are afraid, as much as some people who have been indoctrinated. We tried to do some program about the 20th anniversary, and some students, some government workers turn us down because they say, well, that's a bit too sensitive, 20 years after the event. Now, it matters to Western governments too, because the Western governments is now a bit bothered. Whatever they do business with the Chinese government, they have to appear to be a bit defensive. We've done this because it's for your own good, for the economic gains. They wouldn't put it in such plain terms, but still, should we deal with China? How? And in what terms? At what level? After all, today, the opponents of a Rio Tinto deal, a Chinese company, China Co, is taking or proposing to take a bigger share in the Australian British company Rio Tinto, and they used the Tiananmen Square instance, or they used the troops moving in the footage as an advert against this. Say the previous Labour government at the time condemned the thing, and today, again, a new Labour government sort of sent our mineral resources to the Communist Party as a gift. See, so that's why it is important for everybody at all sorts of levels. Now, the impact of what happened 20 years ago is still rambling on. You've touched on the changes the Chinese Communist Party sort of try to adapt. You've also mentioned the economic development. I think my impression is there are two things. For one thing, it made the Chinese Communist Party even more determined to cling on to power. They, of course, they have their own justifications, but the one thing they have learned is they are on the verge of losing power, and that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't have come to that stage. The second thing is they realize that you do need to have some pressure valve somewhere that you can press for people to let off their steam. That's why we've, in recent years, we've seen more reports of protests inside China, and sometimes violent ones. And you see, as Xiaojiang mentioned, there are a bit more individual freedom. But I would say this is a not genuine freedom or liberty. It's almost like, well, you may enjoy a freedom in a tank, goldfish. Okay, behave whatever way you like, but you are in there. I can watch you. I can do whatever I can at any moment.
Thank you. We'll throw it open in just a minute. I wanted to ask you the difficult question, Jiang. You paid a pretty high price, and of course a lot of people paid an even higher price. What was achieved?
I think the legacy of the 1989, I just mentioned later, more and more people have the citizen conscious, because after the Tiananmen massacre, they think about, although the government propaganda said is people just move on, they don't remember Tiananmen massacre. They move on the economic interest. They don't care politics. They depolitics. Actually, this is not true. People, they still suffer this same political institution. So I think it's after 1989, from the society level, people have want to fight their right. They want to become the independent. I just talk about the practice a different way. This is a very important legacy. The other legacy, I think the people now they want to learn from the former civil resistance, because the Communist Party is successful. They just destroyed all the civil resistance experience. For example, my generation, many people don't know what happened the democracy war and former resistance during the Communist Party rule. they want to learn what happened their former generation resistance. Also, they want to learn what experience from the other countries transform to democracy, such as Soviet Union and East European countries, how can successful transform from the totalitarian to democracy. And also they want to learn from the different civil resistance method. They want to create new civil resistance methods.
Okay, let's throw it open for questions. Julie, if you want to pass the mic around. There's a lot of, I mean, it's your own themes and your own questions to whoever you want. There are big themes such as, do the Chinese just want to go shopping? The more that they see us as they come out into the world a bit more, what is the effect of that two-way relationship? What is the effect of China joining a lot of the world bodies? There's a new theory that the big countries don't influence the bodies influence the big countries, but it's not something I subscribe to. But there's a lot of big themes. Who'd like to kick off with whatever question they want?
I'm holding the mic. So, Isabel, you noted that the government had a choice, and that's absolutely true, and that they were faced with a lot of demands that weren't that radical. I would say that the demands weren't that coherent at the time. Sure. And I'm interested in your observation that, you know, they were faced with losing power. Was that really true? Honestly, it was a bunch of ragtag people, most of whom were drifting back to campus for exams. You know, we had backups coming in from the provinces, but actually the genuine threat could have been co-opted away with a little bit of promise of dialogue and then back to business as usual. I'm interested in the observation that you make that 20 years on, people still think this is too sensitive, but actually the government has delivered on the desires of at least those people who just want to go shopping, which is a fair proportion of the population. So what are they scared of at this point?
Well, I think that I think you're right, that the demands were not that coherent, but they were also manageable. I mean, a lot of Chinese politics is symbolic politics. And the symbolic politics of the leadership, you know, being willing to engage in the square. I mean, if you can talk to 20 people who were there, and they will have 20 different ideas of what would have been satisfying. And but I think that given that, the symbolic politics were really important. And they wouldn't do it. So why wouldn't they do it? Well, they were afraid that that the whole thing would start to unravel. And funnily enough, they're quite prescient in that. In that, you know, in later in that year, things did unravel. They'd also had to impose martial law in Tibet in February. You know, they had quite a lot going on. But I think this is an argument for the rigidity of the system. They never know where the next problem is coming from or how big it's going to be. Why, you might ask, did they spend all these years trying to exterminate Falun Gong, for heaven's sake? You know, is that really worth it? I don't think they were going to overthrow the government either. But I think it is a measure of the state of mind. And I also think that it committed them to a course where this can only go on happening, you know? Because you have this paradox that, yes, they moved the economy, you know, if you want the deal, we'll make you richer but stay out of politics. Well, you have no moral message left, so you have to deliver on that. And the other part of that is you know, foreigners are out to get us, so you must fiercely defend China, and we defend China more than anybody else. But to deliver on the economic prosperity, you have to sort of move to the market. To move to the market, you need a legal framework that functions, at least in terms of contract law. You need a circulation of information, because a market economy needs a circulation of information. You need to give people more personal space so they can think and innovate and do all the, you know, do all the things you need to do in a different sort of economy. And all of those set up dynamics which in the end, you know, come back to challenge you. The lawyers don't all just do commercial law. They worry about the parents of the children in the Sichuan earthquake, you know. It comes back again and again. If you track the Chinese, you know, events in China or events on the Chinese web, it's a constant murmur. It's a constant murmur of frustrated demand of people who are trying to use the tools that they were given in the 90s and in the first years of this century, because they had to be given them, because otherwise the procedures wouldn't work. So it's not going to go away. It will still matter. And most people are not satisfied till the end of their days with shopping. You know, it depends what you buy. But if you buy a home, for instance, well, if you buy a piece of property, then you're interested in defending your property rights. You're interested in, you know, you're interested in why a particular powerful official can steal your land. You're interested in all sorts of things that go on happening because there has been no political reform. So that even if you're, you know, even if you learn to express yourself as a consumer, there comes a point when you want to defend your rights as a consumer. You want to defend the right to give your children, give your baby milk without it getting kidney disease, you know? You want to defend, you want to be sure that what you're feeding your family is not poison because of corruption or negligence or the fact that the system doesn't work. You know, you want at least to be sure the goods you buy are correct. And all of these build a sense of rights that I think really didn't exist, certainly didn't exist in the 70s, but did in the 80s. So I think it does contribute to a process which, in the end, will say this bargain is not enough.
Leaving to one side what happened to Zhao Jiang and many other people, if you can leave that to one side, does anybody here have some sympathy with the idea that the Chinese government is correct to move extraordinarily slowly? Does anyone agree that that's the pace they're moving at is the correct pace? Brave woman over there.
You mean slowly to recognise?
Slowly
to what?
The pace at which it is doing the things that Isabel mentioned about slightly opening up, certainly opening up economically, because of the whole argument about if the system perhaps collapsing. Why do you think that?
I think democracy, while a very popular concept over the last 20 years, say in the last 3 to 5 years, has been sort of not as popular as it has been, and China's success economically is one of the reasons for that. I have a question about elections that I'd like to ask the BBC editor. The experiment that China has been conducting with a kind of authoritarian democracy, as I see it, in the last few years, where they have been rolling out elections at a local level, from villages to districts, and talking about perhaps extending that to regions, but at the same time keeping intra-party elections for central democracy off the agenda. How do you think that's going to play out, and do you think people are going to be satisfied to be able to vote for local officials but not to vote for central officials? Because you mentioned that the CCP was in danger of losing power, and I wonder what your thinking on that is.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party is certainly talking about democracy, but a democracy with Chinese characteristics. I'm a Chinese, born Chinese, but I haven't figured out what the characteristics are really. The local elections in towns and villages that have taken place, only last week, the sort of organization department of the Communist Party say corruption or rigging was rife. And 2 hours later, when I checked that report again, it's gone, and instead it's something else about the village level election. So that means that there is a huge problem in there. But would this go on? Yes, definitely. I think forget about the talk of a direct election, but the thing is, whether it's a slow movement or a fast-paced, people will demand on that. But I don't think the Communist Party at the moment is sure that they can win a national election and stay on in power if they introduce this national election on president or prime minister, whatever. They want to address this issue by talking about inter-party, not intra-party they say, well, we can experiment with direct elections within the party. They even have plans, like the economic plans. In 10 years' time, all the officials at the sort of county or provincial level even may be directly elected, but that's within the party. How are they going to roll out a program nationwide for sort of government posts and so on? I don't think I can wait for it in my working years.
Gentlemen, did you?
Sorry, can I?
Did you have a question?
No, well,
You had your hand up, I beg your pardon.
yeah,
Julie, sorry. The gentleman had his hand up. Sorry, Isabel.
Sorry.
but to go back to your earlier point about pace of change, just to play devil's advocate, aren't the Chinese looking at what happened in Russia and saying, phew, because they became democratic and it turned into a basket case?
Xiaojiang, you want to lead this place to disaster.
But I just say the question. I don't understand. Could you
sorry.
say again?
Look at the Russian, forgive me, you haven't got the
Soviet
mic.
collapse.
Look what happened to Russia.
Yeah.
There's a lot of internal strife and a lot of crony capitalism.
Yeah.
Aren't you running the risk and all the other risks, especially given that the centre may not hold,
So
by promoting
now,
democracy?
This Russia is not a democracy. I don't think that Russia is a democracy, because the democracy is based on civil society. Because this you can look at democracy not only including public regular election, but also it means is a civil society can support that. I think the Russia is very weak of the civil society. So China is a very problem. I think now this China is a crossroad, because Chinese Communist Party absolute now legitimacy, especially after Tiananmen Massacre. That what it means for if you claim you are Chinese, it means you are hijacked by Chinese Communist Party. They use this power and wield power to outside is a dangerous outside. I think it's the other possibility. If you look at the society, how can help the society grow up? How can help the society is out of control, the political power, the Communist Party. That is very important. How can end the monopoly power of the Communist Party? That is a key issue. I think the first stage. But also the people argue after the Soviet Union transfer, but they not is successful automatically, and they must take long term. If you just look at the one generation, maybe they go back. That is a lot of the happen in history. You can look the situation 100 years ago. The first parliament election. That is you can look the China issue. It's not after Communist Party. They actually when they very weak, very weak during the Civil War. They also claimed very clear democracy principle. They support the American democracy. The Nationalist Party is a dictatorship party. But after the Communist Party came into power, they actually the whole the system is a totalitarian system. That I think this problem still remain unchanged.
Thank you, Jay. A gentleman at the back with hair less grey than mine. Thanks.
Hi. I just wondered if I could think slightly wider than the immediate time around Tiananmen. I'm a historian, and I'm just thinking about the last 500 years or so has been dominated by the West. We've sort of been setting the world pace, and it kind of looks like the next 500 years is probably going to be dominated by China, or power is definitely moving east. With that in mind, what do you think China's vision for the world is? I mean, if China was given a blank slate and said, design a world system, what would it look like?
Anyone in particular?
Anyone who's got some bright ideas, yeah.
We'd have China in the middle. And everyone else would be in various stages of tribute. I think that's the traditional way that China viewed the world. And when China was 20% of the economy, that's the way they viewed the world. And I think there's a certain continuity in this vision. And although we don't know in the future what sort of China this is going to be, which is why I guess we come back to chewing over, what the direction of travel really is inside China. I mean, in the present phase, what China says is, we are rising peacefully, we're no threat to anyone, which makes it hard to marry with, very virulent nationalists at home, because that sends a rather different message. And quite honestly, what officials say to you, after dinner when they've had too much Mao Tai, can be quite alarming. It really can. And you've got a generation, well, I mean, in terms of,
Sorry, did you disagree with that?
No.
What a shame.
Well, on the line of, no one's going to be able to, that you have got, ever since the...
Tell us.
Okay, let me just
Keep
put the
it clean.
context that you since 1949 you have a whole cohorts of people who are educated to believe that China was rich and powerful till the West came along and spoiled the party. Now, this is historically inaccurate. But the decline in China started well before the arrival of the West and has never been explained. China's failure to make that transition when it might have to another kind of society. So you have I mean, that's the root of the nationalism. That's why people say, it's all your fault to foreigners, and you just wait. We're coming back, and you won't be able to push us around anymore. And this is put in quite strong terms, when in a few years we'll invade Taiwan and you won't be able to do anything about it. In a few years, we'll have eliminated the Tibetans and you Western liberals will just have to put up with it. People say these things. And this doesn't mean that this is China's policy. I'm just telling you that if you're asking me what a fifth of the world's population think, it's, there are lots of different answers.
Very similar to the DPRK's Juche is built on that type of nationalism and the same argument that it's the big bad outside world that is the cause of our decline, nothing to do with
Well, it tends to be a bit of a constant in nationalist discourse, I have to say.
Woman at the back with blonde hair and then gentleman here.
There's a lot of coverage in the West about China's environmental problems, and I'm wondering to what extent it's affecting the quality of life of people in China, both in the cities and in the rural areas that we might not see so much as Westerners, and how that might drive a push for change, how much of an issue that is in terms of political change.
With respect to our other two guests, Isabel's a bit of an expert
I'm
on this, so we'll give this one back to Isabel. If we can keep the answers and the questions short, because there's quite a few people putting their hands up now.
The environmental crisis is extremely severe. Acid rain over 30% of the territory, 40% of the river flowing through cities is unfit for any purpose. Lung cancer is now the leading cause of death in the cities. There are a whole bunch of health issues, of food issues, of water issues in particular coming down the line. That's before you get to climate change. The water table under Beijing has dropped 80 meters in the last 40 years and so on, so I could go on. The capital is sitting in a desert that is unsustainable. They're trying to engineer their way out of this problem, which I don't think is going to work. Meanwhile, the source of all the rivers in Asia, which are the glaciers of the Himalayas, are melting. It sounds like a problem to me. And all of these are shocks that are coming down the line, and various decades, some of them closer than others. The health issue is one of the many things you can't talk about in China, are cancer villages, for instance. There are so many issues that you can't discuss. Environmental disputes have been one of the main drivers of the protests in the last 5 or 10 years.
Briefly?
Yes, and this whole environmental issues, they realized internally they have pressure from the people. The ordinary people now have more say and protest and all the rest of it. And externally, they realize they have to do something, because when the acid rain falls on Japan, then you have a protest, or in South Korea. And this whole air pollution blowing apparently to the United States of America. So that's why the Chinese government is thinking seriously about doing something.
Gentleman in the middle.
Yeah, hi. I actually had a comment and a question, but I'll limit it to a quick comment now because my question was preempted by the lady who asked about the environment. But the thing is about the China playing the Russia card. I was there in '91 and '92 when Russia was falling apart, and all the officials I interviewed were absolutely scared out of their wits about this. And the thing that underlined their fear was the instability they saw coming out of it. So and they keep playing that fear card in China to this day. The instability is one of the things that they can hold up and say, oh no, we don't want to go that route. And they're still playing the fear card, from what I can see.
Gentleman at the back.
I wonder if I could ask the panel to play a bit of a game. You're sitting here in 10 years' time on the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen. What does China look like? I know predicting the future is always a dangerous game, but for the sake of tonight, play along with this.
You've got 60 seconds each. Off you go.
Well, in 10 years' time, China hopes to build Shanghai into one of the world's financial centers, and they'll also say be a center of international communication. So that's what China is heading to. But at the same time, China would have come into a lot more conflicts with both its neighbors and countries far beyond in terms of grabbing resources and market as well.
Jan?
I have now say something.
Okay.
China is still trying to recover from the mega typhoon that swamped Shanghai in the year before, worse than New Orleans.
Gentlemen, down here on the front row.
This is a question for the whole panel. Given that within mainland China, there's a lot of different generations of thinking. You know, people who have been with the establishment of the PRC from the beginning, people who have gone through the Cultural Revolution, people who have experienced the Tiananmen massacre, and then there are young people who have never experienced anything except economic prosperity. What is your view of? Is it possible? And if so, you know, what is the peaceful and smooth way of transitioning China politically into a democratic system with as little social upheaval as possible?
Zhang, it's the big question that actually underpins nearly everything we talk about. How do you move a system like that to a system of openness and still make the center somehow hold?
It's from the society, the people like the move on and protest and want to translate a peaceful and peacefully. But the problem, the political system, the institutionally crack down the civil rights. That is contracted.
So how do you move it? Look at Aung San Suu Kyi has been trying for 20 years and has got nowhere. How do you move it?
They say the movie, think about the inside, how can the inside of the people, the effective, the set up, the networking, and made the collective, the conscious. This means how they become, why they live together, why these people should be care about the other people's suffer. This one. Other thing, I think the outside the people can do something. Now, a very popular argument is now is a economic crisis and financial crisis. Don't focus other things. It only focus the economic way. So it's dangerous. So that doesn't mean so you have the democracy. It can longer exist for longer. You have civil rights can exist for longer. If you don't care about China's grassroots the struggle for the justice, for fight for the truth, that is you ignore this problem. But the couple of years, the government can control and become the stronger power. That also challenge your system.
Shirong Chen, there is a theory that uber capitalism leads to a form of openness. Discuss. You're on Twitter now, by the way.
Well,
sorry, in the context of...
yes, well, you mentioned peaceful transition, and I also hear people talk about, well, even today, the ex-Cardinal Zen called for reassessment of what happened 20 years ago. But there's some argument which says something like, in fact, the Chinese Communist Party is doing exactly that without saying explicitly. They just don't want to say we got it wrong, but we want to move ahead.
You buy that?
But and also, Tim mentioned the sort of pace. Very often in Chinese history and terminology, you are talking about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. People are already talking about by 2050, China would be this and that.
And we're all familiar with Chairman Mao, was it, in the French Revolution quote? Isabel, briefly, gentlemen there, then we'll go back to the other side. Briefly, sorry, we've got a lot of people.
Sure. First of all, nobody wants there to be a violent end to any move to democracy. Secondly, China did have democracy at the beginning of the 20th century, and for centuries before that had a healthy, functioning, well-organized civil society. This is a remarkably sophisticated society, and we tend to look at it after, you know, the worst that the party have done to it and say it's not ready. If you want to make it ready, you have to allow people to organize politically, because it is meaningless to hold elections if people are not allowed to have parties and alternative programs. What are you voting for? You know, you may be voting for some, you know, an official on the basis that he's stolen less than another, and that's the end of it. You're not preparing a transition. It's just a pretense. It's like panchayat democracy in Nepal was, or something. So if you're serious about a transition to democracy, you have to begin to allow people to organize an alternative. You either do that from the grassroots up, or you do it within the party, and you say the party has many different strands of opinion. We're all competent. We're all used to governing. Let's break up into 4 parties. And this actually has been proposed in China, so it's not. I'm not dreaming up a mad idea. It would be perfectly possible to do that if you wanted to.
Do you think it's happening?
If they want to, they could do it.
Just one sentence. Okay.
Please. No, sorry, please.
If you talk about just talk about the government way, this problem, the government always use this political institution, the violence. They don't want the peaceful. China is now peaceful situation because the people have a civil right, not civil rights, not space place. If you argue the government allowed some space, you know the recent case, the 20 human rights lawyers, they lost their lawyer license. This space, the government, if they find you challenge this political system, especially monopoly power, they just crack down.
Law, capitalism, open society. It's a piece of cake.
Could I ask the panel to share their thoughts with us about prospects for media freedom in China? Can any of you discern any genuine positive moves towards greater media freedom in China in the last 2 decades, especially with the rise of bloggers, social networking, and the ability of ordinary people now to access via the internet or via perhaps notionally illegal satellite TV news that perhaps they weren't able to 10 years ago?
Well, I'm afraid the answer is there is a limited media freedom in China, in the sense that no government organ can function to completely stifle it. There's no way. We all understand the internet, how it works, and that's why it's not by their choice. It is technology pushing the boundary, not the government to say, oh, well, now you got this piece of cake and eat it. That's one thing. The other thing is the government would always want to play on media freedom, and they, well, as they lifted the block on the BBC website or BBC Chinese website whenever they choose to, but they can always put the lid back on.
Isabel?
It's pretty limited, but they have an interesting problem with the internet, which is not entirely about being able to. It's the fact that the internet creates a culture which is by its nature cheeky, irreverent and oppositional. You know, if you're a successful blogger, the government invented what's called the 50-cent party because they realized that people, you know, bloggers were getting extremely popular. So they figured what they needed to do was have their own bloggers blogging the government line, you know, blog, blog, blog. So of course nobody read them. And the problem that they have is that they can stop people doing things, but they can't be attractive in that way to young people. And the internet is constantly thinking up, you know, rude messages for the government, which they find very hard to suppress. I'll tell you the alpaca joke later. You know.
I noticed the Al-Hurra, the Pentagon-funded station for the Middle East, which was set up just after 2003 invasion, is currently rated the least watched pan-Arabic satellite station. Very similar.
The Chinese are proposing to spend 25 million on creating, you know,
I love
unwatchable.
CCTV.
Yeah.
It's a great watch.
Before
the mic goes back over there, sorry, do you have a quick point? Me? Yes, because you're sitting next to the gentleman. You got the mic. Beg your pardon. Coming over here in a moment.
I think it might be quick. Isabel talked about the rigidity of the system, so it made me think about how far there's a rigidity psychologically in terms of the mindset and the consequences of an ideological system and how far that affects the older generation, because there's been a kind of collective thinking and not individual thinking, which is where people have the freedom to think oppositionally. And I wondered how far that means it has to be a transitional process and how it affects the younger generation who haven't been so much part of that process.
Zhang, you broke out of the mindset. How come 1.1 billion other people can't do it?
If you talk about how can so huge the population can join this one and think about, I think the collective conscious is very important. This Communist Party very successful to rule this huge population. Is you can look the violence, the propaganda methods, but the other things they provoke the people against each other. That is means they use the campaigns. Target the different special group in different times, and other people, if you ignore that's the problem. Now the people that try to, if for example, Falun Gong people suffer, and other maybe Tibetan people suffer this tyranny rule, the Chinese human rights activities want to help them. And for example, want to help them get the legal advice, want to help them get justice, want to help them get the humanity rights. That's very important. Although you can look at a very small one, but when the people understand in this system is nobody safe, so the people finally find that they want join this small, this maybe first stage, a very small number of people, and more people join that one. That is maybe they think about it. We must change the political system. That is the key issue China must change. So most people, if the most people think about this one must do. That is, I think, the change. Even you talk about you interesting about environmental problem. You interesting about AIDS patients' rights and other minority rights. But you must think about it. They suffer same the tyranny rule. You must change. It must change. It must have the collective conscious. Must collective the people take the action.
Towards the back there.
Thank you very much. It seems that all these themes that keep cropping up are all very interlinked, that there has to be a change at the political level. And, 20 years on, as a witness to what happened in Tiananmen Square, I was teaching young people, I was researching them, and, you know, it seems like 20 years on that, you know, not so much has changed. In a sense, 20 years back, from what I was studying and from people I was talking to and from seeing the events on June the 4th, it seems they got the worst of both worlds. I nearly said the best, that's wrong. The worst of both systems, you know, the worst of capitalism, you know, sort of footloose, fancy-free capitalism, do what you like, no holds barred, and the worst of communism. And in a sense, I can't see that too much has changed. And we're talking about how long does it take? And, you know, we go back to the point about how long does it take to give people the right to actually, you know, mourn for the children that died and relatives that died. And, you know, for people like me to be able to, like, ever go back to China and publicly grieve for the things that I saw there. So it just seems there's a lot of links here. And I do think, and this is a question I'd like to throw to the panel, and in some ways you've answered it, but do you think that really Western governments have been really naive here in the way that they've dealt with China, that they've been very simplistic? Whenever human rights are mentioned, Tibet always comes up. Not the general Chinese population and not other minorities, such as in Xinjiang, where a lot of atrocities have been committed and still are today. A lot of people are behind bars in Xinjiang just because they waved a flag for East Turkestan. And a lot of our politicians in Britain certainly haven't got any grounding in Chinese history and politics, and it's incredibly complex, as we know. So do you think that really we've been naive to think that, oh yes, we'll let China have the Olympics and everything's going to be fine and there'll be this trickle-down effect? And if they have been naive, you know, how can we almost educate our own governments, let alone the Chinese government?
You're wrong. David Miliband's just not watching your programmes.
I think we all realise the shift of economic power towards the East Asia. And I think the UK government has realised times are changing. We used to have the sort of two superpowers, and that was before the Soviet collapse. Now even the single superpower is somehow not exactly handing over the baton, but trying to say, well, the United States and China should work together to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And I think from an outsider, I don't know what sort of a briefing or advice the UK government is getting regarding China, but certainly, so far as I understand, the UK government wanted to get the best deal out of a China rising in power in many aspects. Economically or politically.
Isabel, are we not, as the British and the other Western governments, do they not get China? They're being naive, thinking they can coax them?
I think they get China, but I do think that economics drives politics in this instance. I think they choose to, you know, look the other way or say, well, we talk behind closed doors about these issues and we get further that way, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking about human rights tonight, and it's hard to tell a good story about human rights in China. But there are all sorts of other things that have improved. You know, if you look at that list of student demands, they've got a lot of them simply because of this transition to this funny hybrid system. And so the reason I think we always come back to the political reform is that, you know, it's that last piece of the jigsaw, and on that, if you can, the failure to reform politically, from that derives all these human rights abuses, all these distortions of history, all these things that we keep knocking up against.
Towards the back again.
Dominic Jackson, ex-Reuters Guardian. Perhaps more importantly, Hong Kong born. 89, I was there in Statue Square with my little candle, and 120,000 other people, which in Hong Kong, notoriously apathetic place, was an extraordinary place to be at that time. And somehow we thought things were going to change, and then it didn't happen. And guess what? A few years later, we're all one country, two systems. When I write to my godchildren, I don't write Hong Kong, China. It comes back. You know, I thought Tim asked, was the government moving too slowly? And Isabel made a very cogent point about circulation of information. Isn't technology going to do something now? In the same way that the fax machine really helped break down the Berlin Wall.
And Al Jazeera in the middle. So I was saying, is it moving? Is it moving too quickly?
But
what I was really getting at.
With my geek hat on, is the technology going to get through? I mean, can they really block everything? That's
No. I mean, you've seen it with Al Jazeera in the Middle East, and sorry, I'm the chairman, I will not carry on anymore. What do you think?
I just want to go
the
back.
The satellite dishes, the internet, is that going to... We talked earlier about people getting in people's heads and how you change how they think. The Great Firewall of China, can it really withstand the surge that's coming against it?
So it's... Sorry, I get...
So our friend from ex-Reuters is talking about the surge of the internet, people coming through, the Chinese looking outside, the satellite dishes. Can China really stand still, given that pressure?
So it's one way. I think it's a very complex issues. If you now is China is popular think about is American consumerist culture. It very influence the people. That is maybe the problem, because they think that they trap to transition. All the people that talk about the transition, democracy, but the transition means trapped into the consumerism. Also, they suffer the tyranny rule of the Communist Party and the monopoly power. That is the problem. Even you argue the more openly, but the people must training themselves think how they should be life look like, why the people live together, and should be people care about other people's life. That is a problem, because even you can take this information, the problem. How can you deal with this information? How can you think about it? How can give this reaction, this information? Because now is maybe the information. I just say a lot of the Western media the take this China is this media landscape. So these people, they just maybe they don't think about a very serious problem. They just consumer and the travel. Maybe this is other trapped other problem. Also, they still in this problem. The problem, I think, is China's problem now is also the people talk about capitalism, save the Communist Party. That is partly true, because you can look the UK and the United States, a lot of the democratic countries keeps very close relations with China. Is only they focus economics. Although you argue we put some human rights issue, we put the environmental issue. Actually, your foreign policy only very short side. And you say naive. I think not can include the short side. Maybe is right as other things. But the Communist Party foreign policy very consistent. They want the the world power and expand power. They don't want to lose this power. That is to the foreign policy the consistent.
Gentleman at the back.
Just coming back, nearly every single talk I've been in China in the last 7 or 8 years has talked about this Great Firewall and about how government has, done various tactics to try and put their view forward in it. The only thing, there is a countervailing thing in this. If you take the American example of the lead up to the war in Iraq, there were some extremely effective individual right-wing bloggers that a very small cohort made a very effective job at neutralising a lot of the sort of liberal anti-war views, guys like Glenn Reynolds and people like them. And I'm just thinking about a brilliant piece that Susan Watts did about 4 years ago for Newsnight on how energy companies in America were sponsoring things over the web to try and neutralise opposition to energy policy and climate change and things like that. Now, I mean, really, I don't think you need big companies. I don't think you necessarily need agencies like Al Hura or anything else like that. It doesn't really work like that in the web. And there is also an important narrative, that's implicit narrative, that's used in the internet that suggests that the great forces will release a great liberal whatever. When you look at, if you look at most of the research, most of the web's used for porn and business-related things.
Well, that's a form of freedom. Thank you. There's a woman in the second to back row, a headscarf.
Hello. It was interesting when you talked about inter-party politics and diversity of views. There seemed to be a lot of hope when the CCP started accepting entrepreneurs within the party. To what extent do you think that people are depending on these entrepreneurs to find it in their interest to bring about gradual change within the party?
Isabel.
You know, we talk about the party as though it believed in communism. I see no evidence that it does. I mean, that was what... where is, you know, Marx would take a look at this party and wouldn't really recognize it as something of his, and that's part of the problem. What is the ideology of China? That's why nationalism, you know, plays a role. That's why this kind of collection of alternative beliefs
regime survival can be a defining
but
philosophy.
you know, if you had to, I mean, they're actually trying to you know, rebrand Confucius as the way forward. Which is a problem for the non-Han Chinese. You know, you come back to this problem of what's China. It's not a nation. It's not an ethnos. They say it's a culture, and it's not the same culture for everyone either.
To address the point, are they working with? Is the higher echelons working with the top business people?
Of course they are. The party is making money. Li Peng's daughter.
And to open up as well, which was
Li Peng's daughter. Li Peng was the man who, you know, put the tanks in. His daughter is CEO of one of the biggest energy companies in China. The entire family made a fortune out of building the Three Gorges Dam. I mean, it's not market capitalism. It's a kind of authoritarian capitalism with market elements. It's neither one nor the other, exactly.
Here's a yes or no question. At the highest echelons of the Communist Party, are they communists?
You can say no if you say not a very simple yes or no question. If you say no, I just say yes.
It's never
possible. No, because the basically political institution maintain unchangeable. If you should change, yes, change what? Yes, change ideology. Other Jiang Zemin, they put the allowed the capitalism enter into the party. You can say observed. Observed is means the Communist Party member can allowed to capitalism. That is they want to say, because they can loop the people. They can loop the people attributedly, and they can put the state owner the property to their own pocket. That is this different mouse period. Also, you can look this is an economic way is a change a lot, but the most of the things they didn't change. They only this development, and they want to control the benefit only the Communist Party interest group.
Gentleman there just bought this bottle of water, and a lady there in the second row, please.
Just to come back to China and to ask rather provocatively, is it too early for China to have democracy, in the sense that, having looked at the way the Soviet Union fell apart without any of the growth of civil society or structures or people who know how to run elections without rigging them, just some of the mechanics of running a legal system, running electioneering, they don't happen overnight. There is quite a big learning curve, and so you've got to start. And I think certainly from our work, we're seeing much more civil society.
So, what is your work?
We're a small organisation that does exchange programs with China, but we're involved in a program that would broker cooperation mechanisms between civil society organisations and local government in the delivery of public services in very poor areas. Gradually, as these projects mature, perhaps civil society in China will be in a better state.
The route is through civil society on the long view.
I'm afraid I would disagree.
Is that a possibility? That it will, in 2050, given a chance to mature slowly, just as there are, accept all the reasons against it, but is that a possibility?
Well, if we're talking about the mechanics of elections and counting the vote and so on, China could be very quick to adapt, to use the latest technology to do that. It's not the mechanics we're talking about.
It's the accountability, the transparency.
Yeah, but nor is it too early. I would beg to differ. Chinese people, on the whole, they know what they want. They know who they want in the position of power as well. It's just that they don't have the power, they don't have the rights to make that choice. I'll give you an example. In one village I happen to know, and there are two candidates for the position of the party boss, and there was a kind of a show election. And guess what? The guy who got the ability and so on got the most votes. But the former party boss of that village still clinging on to power because the county or the township leadership was just too scared to change people. But at the end, the former party boss couldn't do a thing, or couldn't implement this policy and that policy, and the leaders turned around to the guy who lost the seat, even though he won the seat with the most votes, and say, could you come and help?
Do you think there's enough space in China, the political space, to grow the types of things you're talking about?
That's my question.
Because I mean, there isn't DPRK. There clearly is no space.
It's not DPRK.
No, it's not. That's the point I'm making. There's Iran, where you've got a lot of space now. There's DPRK, no space, but maybe they're creating some space.
I think there are pockets where there are surprising amounts.
Yeah, absolutely.
People are allowed to experiment. And then they have a look and see if it works, and if they like it, they'll take it. But they've got huge discrepancies. You've got very illiterate, very poor people.
That's true.
Very sophisticated, fashion designers in Shanghai. How do you hold that whole society together and come up with a political system that works?
I think the gentleman at the back knows.
India figured it out.
Yeah.
But is it?
What impact has the Olympics had on the state's hold on power, looking at it a year on?
Did you agree with the China having the Olympics?
The impact
helped. No. What effect do you think China having the Olympics has had, was the question?
The Chinese Communist Party used the Olympic for add this legitimacy, because they have no legitimacy for the international. They want to show some international support. The China actually support the Chinese Communist Party. Inside the Chinese, especially oppressed Chinese, they put we want human right. We don't know Olympics.
Shirong, do you agree that it was all for the benefit of the CCP?
I would disagree on that, because to many Chinese people, they truly believe that this is a game for the whole of China to say, hey, we are now sort of powerful and we are able to do this and that. There is a sentiment among the general population about it. So it helped China. Of course, it helped the Communist Party in terms of their hold on power, but it has helped the ordinary people to feel good as well.
I think China doesn't know whether it's a poor developing country or a rich world power, and you see this in climate change negotiations all the time, where they say, yes, we must limit our carbon emissions, but only if you pay for all of it. And you say, Western electorates, the last images they saw of China were the Olympics opening ceremony. Do you think Western taxpayers are really going to want to give China money to mitigate carbon?
Well,
so which is it?
There's part of that view also which says the world's media went over to China last year and took a big, close look at China, and of course told the world about it, but I'm not sure that some of the things they told the Chinese people saw. So some of the sort of problems of China were only seen by the outside world, and therefore what changed?
I think you can really exaggerate. It's like the firewall discussion. I don't think the firewall is really it anymore. You've got hundreds of thousands of Chinese coming and going. You've got hundreds of thousands of foreigners coming and going. Any smart 17-year-old can get round a firewall. I've seen them do it. most of the effort on the web goes towards suppressing the internal exchange. It's suppressing people who might find common cause. It's suppressing information about collapsing schools in the earthquake. It's all that kind of thing that most of the effort goes to. And this speaks to a demand and a capacity for organisation in China that is what really frightens the party. So if you're trying to determine whether the party is moving gradually but responsibly towards democracy, you have to ask why, when Chinese people show this phenomenal capacity for organisation and desire for the same, why is that the dangerous thing?
Second row.
Thanks very much. Lots of really interesting discussion, and there are just three things that I wanted to sort of elaborate on. First off, it's been quite interesting. People have continued to try and draw parallels between China and other nations. I think, you know, a decade or so ago, we were all worrying about, is it gradualism versus shock therapy, China versus Russia? We've just mentioned the Olympics. A lot of people have drawn parallels between South Korea and Japan as examples of countries that hosted the Olympics. And, you know, a decade or so afterwards, that was seen as kind of almost a turning point, actually, in terms of the political systems in those countries. I'm not saying whether or not that's true or not. But one thing seems striking to me is that China kind of will always do its own thing. And we can sit here and we can try and make bets about what's going to happen in 2050, but I'm not going to make a bet on that. The second point I wanted to make was just to do with mass movement, really. We've talked about the internet and so on. And also, I think people have alluded to the fragmentation of Chinese society, and I think this is a really important issue. 20 years on, there is still mass social unrest actually every day in China. It's increasing all the time. But what do the panel think in terms of the potential for there actually to be a mass movement that unifies people in the way that Tiananmen did in China today? Whether you can use the internet as a tool, or whether there are enough social ideologies to combine people, social interests that will combine people and unite them to be a mass force to hold the government to account. And sorry to go on, there's lots of really interesting things that have been said. The third thing was this concept of the China national identity and what the Chinese nation is. For me, I've recently returned from Beijing, and for me, one of the most unsettling backdrops to any kind of social debate in China at the moment is the fact that the concept that the government now equates itself with represents the Chinese nation. If you criticise the government, then you are seen as being unpatriotic. That puts people in an incredibly difficult position. You combine that cultural backdrop with, you know, a legal system that is trying to reform. I'm optimistic that it can. But I just wondered what the panel thought in that context. What is the potential for the development of civil society in China in the future? Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
If the Christians can organise, is there any space for people to organise politically? And are you an optimist or a pessimist?
You mean Christian?
Well, if it is possible in China for the Christians to have a network and to come together and to meet and to organise and to have a voice, is there any room for people to do the same thing but with politics?
In long run, yes. I just asked the question, how can unite people? You can look the last December is 60 years anniversary of the United Nations that Human Rights Declaration is Charter 08. The very clear document. You can look the people join this, sign this document, including the different social group, including the peasants. They want to become the independent candidate of the people's representative. Also including some of the workers' activities. They want to organize some of the free trade union, and some is intellectual, and some is human rights lawyer activities, and also including some is minority group. Why so many people sign this very important the document because it's very clear that they say human right for all, not for special people, and also it abolish household the registration. You know, the Communist Party how can control the people? They just put very clear the social hierarchy. And if you top one, you just look down other people. You don't want to care about other people suffer. That is must for all the people in mainland China have the equality for peasants, for workers, for civilians, for students, for minority, the same rights. The other things they put it very clear. And the one-party monopoly power. It means very clear, the Communist Party, they hold this monopoly power. That's why so many people want to join this, to sign this document. The other, I think, is very important. A lot of the victims, when the Communist Party cracked down the civil rights, for example, the 20 years Tiananmen massacre, now the Tiananmen mother and trace this death, and they record this death, and they put the history. You know, the history is very important for Chinese or for other people. The suffer if you ignore. Next generation don't know the happen again, repeat again. So also they want to sue the government official who ordered the troops. The shooting people, and which the military troop leader follow this Deng Xiaoping's order and Li Peng, Yang Shangkun's order. They very clear. This book record around the 2,000 the military leaders' names. Some leaders they don't want to follow this killing order. They was become put in jail. Some of the military leader they follow this Deng Xiaoping's order, the KO people, and they very clear. So they put the history. Now the Communist Party why is very worried about these books, because a lot of the military leaders still hold the power. The other his relevant his friends they ask what did you do during the massacre and during the martial law, because this book can record. Even you censor that one, the people can use the internet, can use the email, send to inside the people. Now more and more people know. But these officials networking, his friends, his family, relevant, his next generation just ask, what is the responsibility for this massacre?
But I think it looks at 24 hours of Tiananmen and which unit did what, which commander was doing what. There's a very similar one. Is that the one?
Yes, this one is 20. Yeah, 20.
There's a very similar one on the overthrow of Milosevic when it became apparent that morning there was only 2 people in the country who didn't know he was going to be overthrown. One was him and the other one was his wife. And the most important thing that happened that day, and similar things happened elsewhere, is people didn't answer the phone because they knew who was calling. They didn't answer it, and the regime was overthrown. We're running out of time, but you were asking about optimism. I think we had optimism there. So we're going to get a deciding vote, maybe. Are you optimistic?
Yes, generally, because as I said, the changes, whether it's quiet, slow, but it is sure, it's taking place. It's not because one particular person or even one party, powerful as it is, want it or not. It's the demand by the populace, by the masses of people. So I think eventually they're going to get there.
I'm also cautiously optimistic. I mean, China's changed immensely in the last 20 years, and you see what people are capable of and what they want. It's hard not to be optimistic. I mean, just one last joke. The other thing about the web and the way people behave on the web is that it's much more irreverent towards the party than it is, you know, if a foreigner criticizes the party. I agree it's taken to be a criticism of China. But on the web, all kinds of things are possible, and very, very funny, and mockery is just widespread.
Well, humour is a great weapon. You were going to tell us a joke earlier. You said Weber?
Well, that's rather an obscene one, but I'll tell you another one instead. Well, it's an obscene visual joke involving an alpaca.
Okay, we'll
you can work it out.
We'll take the second one.
Well, the second one was, you know, the party likes to say, and people like to say of it, that it's lifted 300 million. Say what you like about the party, it's lifted 300 million people out of poverty. Well, you know, a Chinese friend of mine says, well, actually, you could look at it the other way and say 1.4 billion people have lifted the party out of poverty, which is far more accurate account of history.
I must learn some more Chinese jokes. It's probably the first one I've ever heard. Really, thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and thanks for it was clearly a room full of experts here, which came out loud and clear. People clearly know their subject. Thanks to Shirong Chen. Thanks to Isabel Hilton. Thanks to Zhao Zhang for a number of things, one of which, of course, was 20 years ago. You stood up, and we're here talking about it.